On Ötzi the Iceman's skin, the marks look nothing like the tattoos we expect today. No portraits, no names, no slogans, no obvious declaration of identity, just lines. Small groups of dark strokes. Across here, parallel marks there. They sit near the rib cage, the lower back, the wrist, the knee, the calves, and the ankles. In all, researchers have identified 61 tattoos on his body, arranged in 19 groups. Their placement is part of what makes them difficult to interpret. These are not large display images spread across the chest or arms. Many sit on parts of the body that would likely have been covered in ordinary life, or near areas that show bodily wear. And that does not prove a medical purpose, but it changes the question. If a mark was not meant to be constantly seen, then visibility may not have been its only function. Some of the marks are hard to see with the naked eye. On darkened, ancient skin, a tattoo can almost disappear. It can look like damage, shadow, staining, or a fold in the surface. To map them properly, researchers have used multispectral imaging, a method that can make marks visible where ordinary vision struggles. That is what makes them so compelling. Tattoos feel familiar to us. They feel modern, personal, expressive. We often think of them as choices, symbols, memories, affiliations, declarations, sometimes decoration, sometimes defiance. But on a 5,300-year-old body, preserved long after the person's voice, clothing, language, and everyday world have vanished, a tattoo becomes something else. It becomes evidence, and evidence asks colder questions than memory does. Where is the mark? What shape is it? Was it visible in life or hidden under clothing? How was it made? Is it really a tattoo or something that only looks like one? And even if we can answer those questions, can we ever know what the mark meant to the person who carried it? Ötzi's tattoos are among the clearest early reminders that the human body can become an archaeological record, but they also show the limit of that record. The skin survives, the marks survive, the meaning does not arrive with them intact. For a long time, Ötzi could seem like an exception, a famous frozen body from the Alps, carrying an unusual set of geometric marks. But the more archaeology looks at preserved skin, the less isolated he appears. In Predynastic Egypt, 2 naturally mummified bodies from Gebelein added another kind of evidence. These bodies did not preserve tattoos as simple lines alone. They carried figural marks. One male body had tattoos on the right arm. A female body had tattoos on the right arm and shoulder. That difference matters visually before it matters interpretively. A line or cross can resist recognition. A figure asks to be recognized. The Gebelein marks could be compared with motifs known from predynastic visual culture, which makes them feel closer to images than to isolated traces. But that also increases the risk. The more familiar a shape appears, the easier it is to mistake recognition for explanation. Ötzi can no longer be treated as just one strange case. The evidence begins to show tattooing in different bodies, different landscapes, and different social worlds. But it also makes interpretation more complex. With Ötzi, the marks are abstract enough to resist easy storytelling. With Gebelein, the temptation is stronger. A figural tattoo looks as if it should explain itself. A shape resembling an animal, a symbol, or a familiar motif seems to invite translation. Yet, archaeology is not the same as reading a caption. The Gebelein tattoos show that tattooing was present in Predynastic Egypt. They also complicate older assumptions that Egyptian tattooing belonged only to women or only to fertility. But they do not let us reduce the marks to a single neat meaning. A tattoo on skin is direct evidence that a body was marked. It is not direct evidence of every thought, ritual, social rule, or emotion attached to the marking. That gap between mark and meaning grows wider when the tattoos become more visually elaborate. In the frozen tombs of the Pazyryk culture in Siberia, tattooed bodies preserved in ice and permafrost carry a different kind of visual force. Here, ancient tattooing can appear not as small strokes or isolated motifs, but as complex images, animal forms, curving bodies, and lines that suggest a practiced hand and a visual language shaped on living skin. Recent research using high-resolution near-infrared imaging has shown how much can be recovered from these bodies. Ancient skin is not a clean page. It can be darkened, altered, cut, sutured, or damaged after death. A line that looks faint or confused to the eye may become clearer under another kind of light. The image is still not a translation, but it can preserve technical clues, where one line begins, where another overlaps, how wide the lines are, how consistent the marking appears across the skin, and how the tattooing may have been carried out. It can even open the possibility that different tools, or perhaps different hands, were involved. This is where the body becomes more than a surface. A tattoo is not only an image after it is finished, it is a procedure. A needle, point, or blade meets skin. Pigment enters the body. Pain is involved. Repetition is involved. Skill is involved. The finished mark hides the action that made it, and archaeology has to work backward from the trace. The Pazyryk tattoos make that backward movement especially compelling because they are so visually rich. They look, to a modern eye, as though they must mean something specific. It is easy to imagine status, identity, protection, belief, or affiliation. Some of those possibilities may be reasonable, but the image itself does not hand over its original meaning. A tattoo can be clear and still be difficult to read. The next clue is not just what the tattoo shows, but where it sits. On a body, location changes everything. A mark on the lower back is not the same kind of social evidence as a mark on the face. A tattoo near a joint may raise different questions from one on the shoulder. A design hidden by clothing may not have worked in the same way as one visible to everyone who looked at the person. This is why tattoo evidence from Sudan and the Nile Valley becomes important, especially in late antique and medieval contexts. A recent large survey documented tattooed individuals across a broad time span, including both sexes and a range of ages. The evidence includes facial tattoos, and facial placement changes the archaeological problem. A facial tattoo cannot be treated as just another design. It would have been carried into encounters. It could have been seen by others. It may have marked identity, belonging, protection, religious affiliation, healing, beauty, or something else entirely. The evidence can raise those possibilities, but it cannot turn them all into facts. The face reminds us that the body is not a neutral canvas. It is social. It is seen, touched, clothed, exposed, aged, injured, buried. A mark placed on it belongs to that whole bodily life. But even when the skin survives, the act of tattooing usually does not. No one is standing beside Ötzi with the tool in hand. No tattooist is preserved next to the Gebelein bodies, explaining the design. The Pazyryk images preserve the result, not the full event. Archaeology has to work backward from the mark itself, from its depth, its darkness, its edges, its placement, and the traces left by whatever touched the skin. That is where the evidence becomes more fragile. A pointed object is not automatically a tattooing tool. A needle could sew. An awl could pierce leather. Pigment could be used for painting, cosmetics, ritual, or many other purposes. To identify a tattooing implement, archaeologists need more than shape. They need context, use wear, residues, materials, and comparison with experimental work. This is why tool evidence has to earn its place in the analysis. In one study, sharpened bone tools with pigment residues were identified as tattooing implements only through several lines of evidence, not because they simply looked sharp. That kind of work matters here because it shows the standard of proof. The question is not whether an object could have pierced skin. The question is whether the object, its wear, its residues, and its context point toward tattooing more strongly than toward another use. Even Ötzi's own tattooing method has been reassessed. Older explanations have often described incision and charcoal. More recent experimental work has treated the question with caution, comparing different tattooing techniques against the physical signatures on the skin. So, the finished tattoo can be more secure evidence than the tool or technique behind it. That difference matters across the whole investigation. A preserved tattoo on ancient skin is direct evidence. It tells us that a body was marked. If the mark can be imaged, mapped, and distinguished from damage or staining, it becomes a strong archaeological trace. A possible tool speaks differently. It may be powerful evidence, but only if its use can be supported. An image of a marked body in art speaks differently again. It may show how people represented marked skin, but it is not the same as finding the mark on a person. A text can preserve a word, a description, or an attitude, but it still has to be connected carefully to material remains. The point is not to dismiss indirect evidence. Without it, the record would be much thinner. But indirect evidence has to be held at the right distance from the body. The safest path begins with skin, when skin survives. Then lets tools, images, texts, pigments, and scientific methods gather around it carefully. Multispectral imaging helped map Ötzi's tattoos. Infrared and near-infrared imaging have helped reveal tattoo details on darkened or altered skin. Microscopy and residue analysis can strengthen claims about tools. These methods do not restore the ancient world. They make the surviving trace clearer, while also showing where the uncertainty remains. That uncertainty is part of the evidence itself. The bodies we have are not a complete sample of ancient humanity. They are simply the bodies that happen to pass through conditions capable of preserving skin. Ötzi survived because of an alpine ice context. The Gebelein bodies survived through natural mummification in an arid environment. The Pazyryk bodies survived because ice and permafrost protected organic remains that would normally decay. In each case, the tattoo is preserved because the skin is preserved. Without skin, the mark usually disappears with it. That makes tattooing different from many other archaeological traces. A pot can break and still leave sherds. A wall can collapse and still leave foundations. A metal tool can corrode and still keep its outline. But a tattoo depends on the survival of the most vulnerable surface of the body. When that surface decays, the mark does not usually leave a second version of itself behind. This means the map of ancient tattoos is partly a map of preservation. It does not show every place where people tattooed. It shows the places where tattooed skin had a chance of lasting long enough for archaeology to see it. That is a quiet but important reversal. The absence of tattooed bodies in a region does not prove that ancient people there did not tattoo. It may only prove that their skin did not survive, or that the marks have not yet been detected, or that the evidence exists only indirectly and cannot be used with confidence. The ancient body is a fragile archive. Bone may survive when skin does not. Pottery may survive when pigment fades. Stone may survive when clothing, hair, and flesh vanish. Tattooing belongs to the most vulnerable part of that record. It is made on living skin, and skin is usually the first thing archaeology loses. So when tattoos do survive, they can feel unusually intimate. A line on Ötzi's lower back, a figural mark on a Gebelein arm, an animal image across Pazyryk skin, a facial tattoo from the Nile Valley made visible through careful imaging. These are traces once carried by bodies through pain, movement, illness, age, clothing, climate, and social life. They were made on living skin, and that makes them feel close. But closeness is not the same as certainty. Ötzi's tattoos may relate to areas of bodily wear or pain, which has made therapeutic interpretations plausible. The Gebelein marks connect tattooing to predynastic bodies and visual culture, but they do not fully explain the social meaning of those marks. Pazyryk tattoos show elaborate images and technical skill, but they do not come with a key. Nile Valley facial tattoos make visibility part of the question, but they do not settle whether a mark meant belonging, protection, religion, healing, beauty, or something else. What survives most clearly is the fact of marking. Skin touched, altered, darkened, patterned. From that, archaeology can move carefully. It can map placement. It can compare forms. It can test tools and residues. It can use imaging to recover marks almost lost on ancient skin. It can ask why certain bodies, in certain environments, preserved traces that most bodies would have lost. But the final step is slower. A tattoo begins as an act in life. Someone made it. Someone endured it. Someone saw it or did not see it. It belonged to a body, moving through a world of relationships, beliefs, pain, status, work, illness, and memory. Archaeology meets it after almost all of that has fallen away. What remains may be a dark line, a cross, a figure, a pattern on the face, a shape recovered by infrared light, enough to prove that the body was marked, enough to show that skin could carry meaning in the ancient world, not enough to translate every mark into a single answer. That is the value of ancient tattoos as evidence. They let us see the body as more than bone, more than a mummy, more than a source of diet, disease, ancestry, or death. They show the body as a surface, once altered by choice, technique, pain, and contact. The ancient body can become an archaeological record, but it remains a human one, legible in places, silent in others.